Hello, guys. Sorry for the delay in tonight's show. I was having a hard time finding some stuff, and tech be teching. Um, so let's just get started. Hello, my fellow creepy little weirdos, and welcome back to another episode of Horror History and Hauntings Library Podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Christina Spencer, and tonight we're continuing our journey through the paranormal, My Chosen Journey, by paranormal investigator and author Ernie Atwell. If you've ever wondered what first sparked someone's passion for the paranormal, tonight's reading offers a fascinating glimpse into those defining moments. Every investigator has a story about how they began, and in these chapters, Ernie shares the experiences that led him down a path that would eventually take him to haunted locations, unexplained encounters, and a lifetime of dedication to exploring the unknown. Tonight, we'll be reading Chapter 4, My Journey Begins, and Chapter 5, It's Paris. If you're just first time joining us this evening, make sure you go back and watch parts 1 and 2 of chapters 1 and 2 and 3. I'd greatly appreciate it. And as always, this is a live reading shared with permission to help introduce you to Ernie's work. If you enjoy what you hear tonight, I highly encourage you to pick up a copy of Paranormal, My Chosen Journey, and experience the complete story for yourself. So grab your favorite drink, dim the lights, and get comfortable. And let's turn the page together to Chapter 4, My Journey Begins. Let's go. Well, I don't think the video's working. Hold on one second. Well, at least I can pull up the audio. So just bear with me. Technology is just fighting me today. It doesn't want to do what I want it to do. It wants to do what it wants to do, and I don't like that. Well, heck. Hmm. Well, I guess it's just going to do that. I'm here the whole time, but for some reason the video part didn't record, but the audio did. So we're just going to play it. Unfortunately, you're not going to get the visuals that you're typically used to, but at least you get to hear the story. Sorry, guys. Like I said, I've had some technical difficulties today. It appears that the sound isn't going through, so just bear with me 1 second while I try to rectify here this real quick. Gotta love technology. Oops, I think I figured out what I was doing. Hold on. Gotta love technology today. Ah, that's what was doing it. Okay, let's try this again, guys. I'm so sorry. Paranormal, My Chosen Journey by Ernie Atwell. Chapter 4. My Journey Begins. Life continued on as normal, and some time had pleasantly passed. I was really enjoying school and everything that I was involved in outside of school. Yet almost all involvement had something to do with school or church. Like most normal children my age, I did have my neighborhood friends and always enjoyed the playing that we did in the alley or at one of our houses. We lived a block away from a park that had a baseball field and a basketball court. Not to mention in the winter, it proved the best sleigh riding in the area. But for me, the coolest part of our park was that it was right next to a cemetery with only a fence dividing the two. Most everyone in the area had a family member or friend buried there, and sometimes on weekends, my grandfather and I would take a walk through the massive graveyard, and he would show me family members and friends and tell me stories about them. To some, that may seem creepy or a bit disturbing, but it was quite peaceful and very respectful way to pay a visit to loved ones who have since left us. I always remember walking the cemetery at the beginning of spring. It seemed as if everything was coming to life, even the dearly departed. The singing birds, the beautiful variety of flowers were starting to bloom, but I always liked seeing all the rabbits running around. The cemetery seemed as if it was taking on an all-new, pleasant attitude all its own. Everywhere you looked, you would see signs of life. To me, it made me feel as if the souls were there watching over us as we strolled peacefully through, paying homage to those we knew and we didn't know but would so frequently pass. I always had a passion for nature and all her beauty. To me, it was a sign from God allowing us to see all his wonderful work, and it always gave me a great appreciation for the simple yet amazing things in life. Sometimes I would stop and sit, whether I was in the park or in the cemetery, and just listen. You know, if you sit and open your mind, the universe is always speaking to us, and if you pay close enough attention, you can hear it. So many people don't realize just what's going on around them. In my opinion, the key to happiness is enjoying and accepting the simple things in life. Just like in paranormal investigating, a person relies on all their given senses. Surrender your senses to nature and all the amazing natural things the world has to offer, and you too will feel the peace and love of life that God has intended for us. As I mentioned earlier, I was an avid reader, kind of a daydreamer, I suppose. Many times I would choose a book and find myself not unhanding it until the entire book was read. I've already found myself so caught up in other worlds that I would read more than one book in a day. Sometimes on a nice day, I would choose my paperback adventure and walk to the park. I would walk up the highest hill and park myself under one of the massive trees, and there I would sit, directly between the park and the cemetery, and surrender myself to the center of what nature had to offer, and eventually find myself trapped in my book for hours. I really enjoyed living with my grandparents, and I had finally discovered a sense of peace and security that my soul had longed for. Since being visited by the priest, those encounters really left me intrigued and sparked an interest inside of me to learn and to study as much as I could, or at the time, as much as society had to offer. I frequently heard stories on television and from family members, and yes, even from some friends. But for the first time, I had my own true account in what I could basically call my first real paranormal experience. I found myself replaying every paranormal or unexplained story ever told to me, whether it was from my mother, my uncle, or true life stories that was told to us by Father Mike. That, along with my extensive reading, my mind somehow wanted to connect all of this together and try to find a link in which this could be all connected. Being a very strong believer in my faith and the teachings that I learned in school, I couldn't help but think that this connection was all spiritual and somehow monitored by God, even if the spirit, depending on the realm, was not aware of it at the time. I know in the spirit realm, there are intelligent spirits, residual spirits, and poltergeists. But at this point in my studies, it was the intelligent haunts that I found to be most intriguing. I understood the residual aspects and all the many reasons and elements that can keep them alive, but as far as the intelligent, there were so many possibilities, so many questions, and so many theories. Not to mention, a spirit could possibly need help from a living soul, like in the case of my mother hearing her uncle calling out for her. It was clear to me at this point, despite all the modern day ghost stories and alleged true stories that we were seeing on television and movie screens, I had to take my reading and research much further back and start from the beginning, as far as I could research. Each night before going lights out and asleep, I would read certain passages from my Bible that I received for my first Holy Communion. I was so fascinated with the stories of angels and spirit visitation, and I would try to wrap my head around how these same occurrences, almost 2,000 years later, are still being reported by people all over the world. Some would report seeing the Blessed Mother Mary. Others reported seeing 3 children that appeared in Fatima, a central Portuguese town, and a Catholic pilgrimage site where it is said that the Blessed Mother Mary appeared in 1917. The story of the famous miracle in Fatima began on May 13, 1917. 3 children, ages 7, 9, and 10, claimed to have encountered the Virgin Mary on their way home from tending a flock of sheep. It was claimed that the children saw the apparition of the Blessed Mother Mary on 6 different occasions. The final appearance was on October 13, 1917, and that became the most famous. Over the years, at various locations, people have claimed to have seen the apparitions of the 3 children that the Blessed Mother Mary had appeared to on those miraculous days in 1917. There was a story that my uncle once told of a church many years ago that allegedly had a residual haunt that consisted of a horse-drawn gladiator carriage that could be seen making its way through the church, resulting in a duel of swords over a period-dressed lady who was always on the scene, on her knees crying over the man she longed for, no one ever knowing which man it was. It was described by many Catholic priests and brothers that this occurred nightly at the same time each night and was almost viewed as if you were watching an old-time movie on a real projector. There were so many stories that I grew up hearing, and each one I found to be more fascinating than the last. I found myself spending all of my visits to the library on Saturday morning researching as much information as I could find on all topics regarding ghosts, spirits, hauntings, poltergeists, and everything and anything involving any kind of haunts or unexplained activity, both from the points of view of paranormal and spiritual. I could not help to feel that in some way, somehow, I was going to find a connection between the spirit realm and the religious encounters. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the paranormal industry had not made it mainstream yet, and seemed to be something that was only occasionally spoken of by those who had an interest. In those days, we had the occasional movie or primetime documentary that followed cases of the paranormal or something unexplained that the nation seemed to take a liking to. Then again, there was the far and in-between movie that would hit the big screen based on true events. At that time, I would find myself watching these programs and movies, then devoting all my free time away from school activities, researching and digging up as much information as I could on what it was that I was viewing. All this information seemed to go off in so many different directions, involving so many different circumstances, but one common factor always came to play. Was it, or was it not, a ghost? At this point in time, many ways were being discovered on how we could try to use different theories and technology to gain scientific proof that ghosts really did exist in our world, even in a different realm of time, continuum, or parameter. One method of possibly locating spirits that I found completely fascinating and still use in present day is to document evidence in investigating the paranormal is the Polaroid camera. Many years ago, a Polaroid photograph was taken of my great-grandmother Gertrude. She was attending a cousin's baby shower, and as a joke, she sat in the umbrella chair of the expecting mother-to-be. The entire family was in the room and laughing and enjoyed this family time together in the celebration of a new family member, soon on their way. My mother took the photograph along with many others throughout the day. Later that evening, my mother arrived back home and was seated at the table reviewing all the photos she had proudly taken commiserating this joyous day. One photograph in particular seemed to stand out upon my mother's review. It was the photograph of great-grandmom seated in the chair. You could clearly see three figures standing behind her. The most notable characteristics was that the three sets of eyes. The backdrop for the photo was a plain white living room wall that provided not enough space for anyone to actually be standing between the wall and the chair. Out of the photos that were taken that day, that was the only photo of great-grandmom by herself, and yes, the only photo where the mysterious figures decided to show themselves. Now, can I sit here and positively say that that was multiple ghosts that appeared to accompany her in the photo? Absolutely not. However, over the years, great-grandmom had lost 3 of her siblings, so you can imagine where everyone's mind started to go. It was never proven either way if the photograph was legitimate proof of a paranormal occurrence, but for the most part, it made some family members feel as if the past siblings are in fact watching over their sister. This, to me, was just another example of how spirit can provide comfort, protection, and most importantly, peace. We are raised to take comfort in always having past loved ones continue to live on in our hearts, memories, and mind. Maybe this was indeed a way for the spirit realm to provide all these feelings for someone who missed them, even if a glitch in the photo is all it was. Maybe, just maybe, a different realm was responsible, knowing the result would be provided. The more I read about spirits and spirit visitation, the more I come across stories, both ancient and modern, regarding angels. I couldn't help but feel that we were all protected by a guardian angel, if not several, sent by God. It is also said that our own soul, spirit, originates in heaven, watched over by a guardian angel. When our time comes forth for our soul to come to life in our physical form, it is believed by some that our guardian angel prepares us and releases us onto earth. Through my studies, it is my complete and entire belief that every living soul is sent to earth in a living physical body with a particular intended purpose, originating and meant to serve our Lord, even if not in a religious manner. We've all heard and used the term circle of life, and I truly believe life is in fact a continuous moving circle. We, as the human race, are filled with emotions, desires, and feelings. At some point in time, we have all felt that surreal feeling of something so good to be true that you didn't believe at the time that it was happening. It may have brought out feelings in someone or something that you never knew existed deep inside your soul. We have also unfortunately felt the emotions of heartbreak, whether it was losing a loved one, sustaining an injury, or a circumstance bad enough that you could do anything else other than to ask God why. This is where, in my opinion, that God's will, or as others like to call it, the circle of life comes into play. Whether a circumstance is the best ever or maybe the worst ever, you just can't fathom the thought of why this has occurred. This is always what I keep in mind. God allows everything, whether it's good or bad, to happen for a reason. At the time of the event, we are not to know why such an occurrence has occurred, and that only God knows why, and it's His plan and shouldn't be questioned. As time goes on and the life circle continues, everything from time of the occurrence up until the present will start to come together and take form, allowing us to understand why we went through exactly what we did, and as an end result, everything works out and starts us on a new path with a new desire in life. I've frequently compared this process to a jigsaw puzzle, and by the time of completion, all the pieces fit together to complete a beautiful portrait. It's been said that once our guardian angel sends us down, once our physical life is complete, our soul will return back to where we originally started. Throughout the ages, as mentioned, there has been many claims of angelic encounters, also referred to as encounters of a miraculous nature. Some feel that they have been blessed to see the vision of an angel, or others have said that they feel it as if their guardian angel, but have no way of being certain, for most of us don't remember any parts of our pre-life experience. Like myself, if you are one of the less fortunate who have not yet experienced a vision of an angel, don't feel that you were forgotten or left out or alone. There are certain softer ways that theorists say that our angel watches over us, in a manner not to frighten or disturb everyday living, and I'm sure it's something that most of you have experienced and maybe not have looked at from a somewhat spiritual or religious standpoint. Let me ask you this. I'm sure everyone has heard that old adage that things happen in threes. There is a theory that your guardian angel uses the method of repetition. How many times have you seen a certain number over a short period of time? It happens to present itself 3 times. How many times have you heard a certain song that may no longer be popular or maybe be considered old, but you hear it over a short period of time and it reminds you of someone, or possibly someone you had feelings for, or someone who may no longer be with us? It's the method of repetition that causes our mind to reflect that the kindness in our hearts that make us reach out to that person, or simply just say a prayer for the soul who is no longer with us, but who may need that extra guidance from our faith. It's the same when you hear a person's name come up for no particular reason by 3 different people, some who may not even know each other. But whatever the case, this could be your guardian angel giving you a subtle sign to reach out and check the welfare of that person. Have you ever been strolling along or going about your day with nothing really on your mind except for the task at hand? Then out of nowhere, your sense of smell becomes completely overwhelmed, even if for a brief moment. Maybe a pleasant smell or a whiff of a food that you enjoy or desire. That is said to possibly be your guardian angel letting you know that they are close by you. Maybe you are looking up and seeing an angel-shaped figure in the clouds overhead. This in all forms of communication from your guardian angel, letting you know that you aren't alone. For those of you that are more intuitive than others, a pleasant frequency may be ringing in your ear, and this too can be your sign from above that you're being watched over. A very common theory that we all encountered is a feather. A feather may cross your path in an unlikely location. It is said to arrive when you are most in need. Believers say that the sign from the angels is a safe and gentle way for them to communicate and let you know that you are not alone. Angels will use feathers of all shapes and sizes and colors. They will align them on your intended path, and most of it not all the time. You will not know or understand the reason, but just rest assured, no matter the reason, you are not alone. Those of you that have investigated with me or attended an event where I spoke know that I am not easily impressed by orbs. I commonly refer to myself as not a big orb fan. Yes, orbs do exist and can be classified to a certain extent as paranormal. An orb is a ball of energy that exists in our space. An orb is perfectly round, has its own flight pattern, and is illuminated all on its own with no outside source. An orb is most commonly captured in a photograph and can be even seen making itself known as it travels by on a video. In some cases, an orb can be seen with the naked eye, but you will have a better chance of seeing this phenomenon on a photograph or video. Due to the fact that an orb is a traveling source of energy, the theory behind the paranormal aspect of this is if a spirit or ghost is trying to manifest, they will use the energy provided by the orb to make themselves known. Some confuse capturing an orb with capturing a ghost. An orb isn't a ghost, but if you are in an active location or area and start capturing orb activity, keep the camera rolling and the picture snapping. There will be a good chance that there is much more to come. Chapter 5. It's Parris. A few years had passed and my parents had settled into their new home. As for me, I continued all my activities and all my participation in all the church organization and clubs that I belonged to. It was a tight schedule that I kept, but it was keeping me occupied and most importantly healthy. I always managed to find the time to continue all my readings and my fascination for research into this world of the unknown, and I felt was just waiting to be revealed. On Sundays, my father would come pick me up in the morning after our return from church. I would load up my BMX bike into his car, and off we would go for a Sunday to be spent with my parents and my younger brother. I was friends with the children in their neighborhood, and my parents were friends with most of their parents. All of the adults in the area seemed to be pretty nice, and all seemed to be pretty down to earth, but the part that I admired the most was that none of the adults ever questioned why I only came to visit on Sundays, then returned back home to my grandparents. The Sundays I spent with my parents were enjoyable and always fun-filled, but to be quite honest, after we would have dinner, I couldn't wait to start on my way home because I always looked forward to getting back into my world, which consisted of either laying on the sofa or the floor, deep into a book while eating a snack and enjoying a cold can of soda pop, knowing that soon I would wake up and it would be time to return to school for an all-new week. I know it must sound kind of odd, but I really did enjoy going to school. Going to Catholic school for me was much more than just going to school. Imagine, if you would, being in a place where there was the deepest sense of love, sense of compassion, and sense of eternal security that was not only shared with your family, but with all your friends. And this was all made possible because we all shared the same common denominator, and that was our sense of religion. School is school, but when your school is connected to your church and all your friends and their parents and grandparents all attended that church and participated and supported all the events, it really doesn't make school seem like school, and it makes it more of a place that you wanted to be. One Friday evening, I was on the phone with my mother, and we were discussing my upcoming Sunday visit. My mother, knowing my deep desire for the paranormal, asked me if I remembered their new neighbor named Linda, and if I had met her last Sunday that I was there, since she had just moved back into the block 2 weeks ago. I did see the lady, but I told my mother that I didn't actually have the opportunity to speak to her. Linda was a short lady, somewhat on the heavy side, and had long strawberry blonde hair. And by just seeing her outside with other adults, she seemed to be very outgoing and very talkative. The next thing to come out of my mother's mouth, I guess you could say I was not expecting. My mother said to me, "You know what she is?" Of course, my response was no, because I just told my mother a few seconds ago I never spoke to the woman. My mother replied, "She claims to be a psychic." I returned with, "Psychic? You mean she can predict the future?" I know exactly what my mother meant, but I suppose the way I responded was just a touch of sarcasm, not directed at my mother, but more towards their new psychic friend. Although I was young and my main passion was the paranormal and spirituality, I was well aware of the gifts that psychic mediums possess. At this point in my life, I can honestly say I had never met a psychic medium, and yes, I was still very skeptical when people claimed that they had this ability. Now, for the record, I'm not saying that all psychic mediums are a fraud or trying to pull a hoax on people for fame, notoriety, or fortune. But at the same time, I really wasn't educated enough, nor did I have any personal contact or encounters with a true psychic medium. I knew through my research that living souls, who I feel are chosen, truly have special gifts, some more than others, and others to a different extent. I also felt that some felt as if they believed that they were gifted when in reality they weren't. So in my opinion, that didn't make them a fraud, it just made them misunderstood within themselves, or possibly even seeing coincidental evidence or natural feelings provided by our senses and instincts as a psychic ability, when in reality it was nothing more than human nature. It wasn't until I became an adult and started investigating the paranormal and socializing and working with some of the best psychic mediums in the field that I truly learned and understood to a whole new level just what it is that each soul possesses, and how each soul can also be different, but how crucial all are. Not to mention essential and beneficial to so many, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. I honestly feel that those who are truly gifted, whether it is in the ways of a medium or those with true psychic ability, they truly are chosen and are here to aid the living and, yes, the non-living. And I feel that no matter the gift that was bestowed upon them, it is a gift from God given to a special person as a means of helping someone in need, both here and past. Now, you may understand why my mother detected a hint of sarcasm referring to the new neighbor as a psychic. I could tell in my mother's voice that there was more that she wanted to say about it, but it was obvious that she didn't know how to approach the delivery. A sense of joy or excitement overtook her voice, almost as if she had some sort of juicy gossip that she needed to reveal. Then, out of nowhere, my mother blurted out, "We are going to a seance tonight." I immediately repeated, "A seance?" She said, "Yes, we're planning a get-together tonight at Linda's house." And she said she knows how to do a seance, so we're all agreed that it may be interesting. I have to admit, I felt as excited as my mother was acting, but I knew I had to keep my curiosity composed because, to me, staying skeptical was staying professional. I know from growing up, my father was the type of guy who just goes with the flow, and most of the time, my mother being the flow. But my father wasn't one to speak of religion or feelings, nor did he seem to show any interest in anything paranormal or supernatural. So yes, I agree, this should be very interesting. I remember being home that night, sitting at the table reading a book, but eventually I had to cease from my reading because I kept watching the clock and wondering how and if the seance was in progress. I didn't know what to expect when I speak to my mother, but one thing was certain, the suspense was so distracting that for the remainder of the night I couldn't think of anything else. On Saturday, I woke up bright and early and made my way to the breakfast table. It was a typical Saturday breakfast. My grandmother prepared a lot of food, and my Aunt Thelma and I sat and ate as my grandfather shared his stories of the week past and all the annoying yet funny tales of he and his co-workers. I really enjoyed listening to my grandfather talk. He had a way of making every story somehow funny, whether it was meant to be or not. He always spoke of so many people, some I actually knew and some I had to call into question if they really even existed, but either way, it was something I looked forward to and enjoyed. Once breakfast ended and my food settled, I went out to the alley to shoot some baskets and soak up the sunshine and some fresh air with one of my friends. The suspense was starting to consume my thoughts, but I figured I would call my mother later in the morning, because I figured they possibly had a late night and I'm sure my mother was busy working around the house. Eventually lunchtime approached and my friend had somewhere to go with his folks, so I thought now would be a good time to call my mother and get the scoop on how and if they even had the seance. Being somewhat serious and an intense thinker, I was hoping my parents' encounter was taken seriously and could provide some serious answers to some serious questions that I had stewing in my head for almost 24 hours. I remember getting that cold feeling inside as I dialed the phone. You see, back in those days, there wasn't call waiting or cell phones or even a beeper where I can send a page followed by 911, meaning, "This is an emergency, call me back." My mother answered the phone immediately. Trying to keep my anxiety bottled up, I started asking normal questions such as what are you all doing? What's Eric doing? I guess I wanted to sound prepared for what my mother's response would be when I asked the burning question, but little did I know that I was not prepared for what my mother said before I even finished my pleasantries. My mother very abruptly said, "Ernie, I will have to call you back. You're not going to believe what happened last night and what is going on." I went completely silent, and for once in my life, I guess you could say that I didn't know what to say. She followed up by repeating, "I'll call you back." The phone went dead, and for a brief moment, my mind went blank. I slowly hung up the phone receiver, and by the time the phone was on the hook, my mind raced 100 different directions. I couldn't even fathom the thought of what possibly could have happened, or why there was such a concern on my mother's voice. All I knew at this point was that something did in fact occur, and I had no idea what it was, or if it even related to their planned out seance with the new so-called psychic neighbor. I tried so hard to keep myself occupied, but all I wanted to do was pick up the phone and call my mother back. But I respected her request and just decided that she will call me when the time is right, and whatever I hear will be that much more appreciated, as long as it had to do with something involving the unknown. On that particular Saturday, I decided to jump on a bus and head to my parents' house, in the hopes that something out of the ordinary occurred, something that someone like me would find oh so ordinary. Before I left home, I called my mom back and clarified that I would come down on my own and spend the night. That way, I would already be there for my Sunday visit. That way, I can pry into just what had my mother sounding so shaken. I arrived at my parents' house just as the sun was starting to set. As I eagerly walked up the courtyard with my overnight bag, I could see my brother Eric running around with his friends as my mother stood outside talking with some of the neighbors. I could tell by the waving of my mother's hands that there was an intense conversation in progress. One of the neighbors motioned to my mother that I was approaching, and after a quick glance, they kept on talking. My mother paused for a brief second and said, "Ernie, put your stuff inside. I'll be in a minute." I walked into the house, and my father was seated in front of the television. He looked up and asked, "Did you see your mother out there?" I knew that meant one of two things. My mother had something she wanted to tell me, or my father was actually wondering if she was outside. Either way, my mother came inside and exhaled as if to say, "Here we go." I sat calmly down at the table as my mother began fiddling around in the kitchen. My father walked in and advised us that he is taking the dog for a walk and will be back in a bit. I knew whatever had happened had to be good, because my father didn't want to be part of the conversation, nor did he want to hear about it again. Then again, that's just the way my father is. Eventually, my mother sat down at the table across from me, and I could tell not only by the look on her face, but by the glare in her eyes that, in her opinion, something serious was about to be revealed. My mother began by saying, "Well, you know the neighbor Linda that I was telling you about. Something's not right with her, and now I don't know what to do." Before I even had time to reply, my mother went right into the story of what turned out to be the most terrifying night with neighbors that they will never forget. According to my mother, this is how it all began. Based on my mother's words, Friday evening arrived and all the neighbors assembled out in front and walked to Linda's house together. The large bay window that these townhomes provided gave everyone the opportunity to notice that Linda's dining room was dark except for a shimmering light that was apparently bouncing off of something that obstructed her window. As my parents and the rest of the neighbors began to shuffle in, Linda greeted them at the door. Not only was she wearing an odd yet serious smile, she was wearing clothing and a head wrap that resembled that of a gypsy. Gazing across the room, my mother was taken back by what she was seeing. Linda had a very long, rectangular-shaped table that took up most of the entire room. Covering her big bay window was a line of 3 mirrors, as well as 3 mirrors on the opposite side of the table, positioned directly behind where her intrigued yet unsuspecting guest would be seated. The shimmering light that was peering ever so slightly from out the window was complements of multiple candles that were on the main table and also along the smaller tables that housed the mirrors. My mother, at this point, she said she wasn't sure if she was seriously prepared for whatever her new but still not known neighbor was about to engage in. All the guests stood around for a few minutes, talking and laughing, engaging in trivial conversation, but in my opinion, they were procrastinating the real reason that they decided to spend their evening with the newest addition to their small neighborhood circle. Eventually, Linda asked everyone to have a seat around the table. Prior to getting started, Linda advised everyone that she has had her gift of psychic abilities since she was a small child. Furthermore, she advised them that she is experienced in conducting seances and has partaken in many over the years. At this point, no one was really sure what to think about, but based on the look on my father's face, it was very apparent that he would have much rather have been in his own living room or on one of his evening walks with the family dog. My mother, on the other hand, she was excited, yet skeptical and somewhat nervous, wrapped up in one big ball of curiosity. My mother and I were very much alike when it came to this sort of thing, and everything else involving the supernatural, or the unknown, and everything in between. But on this occasion, my mother said that something inside just didn't feel right. My mother should have heeded my number 1 rule and favorite piece of advice: go with your gut instinct. Linda gave a brief explanation of what a seance is and the purpose behind conducting a seance. Now that everyone was aware that their goal was to make contact with those that have passed with the guided help of a medium, the purpose of this friendly gathering was now underway. Linda started by softly asking everyone around the table to join hands and close their eyes as if they calmly continued to breathe and slowly bow their heads. Not a sign of disrespect or anything along those lines, my mother couldn't help but to find herself peeking around at the other participants to see the seriousness of everyone else's attitude concerning what was taking place. Much to her surprise, everyone was doing exactly as they were instructed to, and surprising enough, so was my father, in the hopes of my mother that he didn't doze off. Linda began the session by welcoming everyone that was in attendance and explained to those that weren't just exactly why they were there and the hope of what they were trying to accomplish. After a few minutes of kind words and pleasantries, she advised her living and soon-to-be non-living guests that she is opened, I guess you could call it a pathway, for anyone on the other side that may want to come through that has a message, a request, or who may just want to be recognized. By this time, everyone was pretty much into the whole seance experience and was taking the main event of the evening very seriously. I'm sure each individual at the table was hoping for something to happen, and I'm sure each hoped for something entirely different. Since this was new to everyone there and everyone having different expectations, if any expectations at all. Several minutes into the seance, Linda informed everyone by saying, "Someone has stepped through and decided to join us." Suddenly, it was as if my mother could hear everyone breathing. At first, she thought maybe this was one big prank my father could have arranged and included all the neighbors in on this elaborate hoax, since they all knew how my mother adores everything spooky and all the spiritual tales of visiting ghosts. Not knowing exactly what to think, my mother continued along, but also continued a peeking, wondering eye on everyone else. Locked in on Linda, my mother noticed her facial structure changing, almost tightening as she began rolling her head around and making uncomfortable moaning and what sounded like whining sounds. Not in her soft and very feminine spoken voice, but in the voice of a man. The entire session was interrupted, causing everyone to open their eyes and raise their heads as they gazed around the table at each other. Not by the manly sounds spewing from the mouths of the small, soft-spoken woman, but from the unintelligible mumbling that is taking over and surrounding the room, not to mention surrounding the table. As my parents and all that was seated at the table began to look around, breaking the stillness in the room and in their chairs, it was revealed that the unidentified mumbling was coming from the black shadows that were making their appearance known, going from one side of the room to the other by way of the mirrors. Not understanding or being able to grasp what was transpiring, one of the neighbors sitting across from my parents frantically yelled out, "Who are you? What do you want?" At this point, all activity seemed to cease except for the disturbing gargling sound still coming from the throat of their host and seated at the head of the table, Linda. In almost what appeared to be a choreographed move, everyone slowly and cautiously turned their heads toward the head of the table, just in time to notice Linda breathing very heavily as she slowly lifted her head and began opening her eyes. In what my mother described as looking like someone other than Linda, now seated at the head of the table. She gave a deep, soulful, piercing stare, still continuing to pant as she slowly turned her head, followed by her eyes in the direction of where my father was seated. Once her now black, almost malevolent-looking eyes came to rest directly into the eyes of my father, she mustered one last deep breath and without blinking, said in a strong yet deep and rough disturbing voice, "This is Parris." A silence fell over the entire room as Linda slowly lowered her head and closed her eyes in a rhythmic motion and into what appeared to be a trance-like state as her breathing was now somewhat shallow. The brief moment of silence seemed more like an eternity as everyone sat motionless and gazed horrifically and confused at my father. Without saying a word, my father slowly placed his fingertips lightly on his forehead, partially covering his face, and stared blankly at his palm, while a look of concern took over my mother's face. Eventually, after a moment, my father slowly stood up and, without saying a word, pushed his chair and exited Linda's house. My mother, without waiting too long, stood up, stared around the table at all their friends except Linda, took a deep breath, and pushed in her chair, still wearing the look of concern or possibly fear, and very abruptly left the house just as a soft light chatter began amongst their friends. Once arriving home, my mother described my father as sitting in front of the television, although it wasn't on, just staring at the screen as if he was in some sort of catatonic state. She asked my father if he was all right, and he just stood from the couch and said, "I'm going up," a term he liked to use when referring to going to bed. At this point, my mother was basically helpless and had no idea of what to do or even what to say or who to say it to. You see, my father was a man of very few words, and never did he express his feelings, let alone ever discuss them. That's one thing that always made my father hard to read, is that he never let you know what he was thinking or how he was feeling. In all my life, I never heard my father address my grandmother as mom or mother or any other normal name that someone calls their mother. In fact, he would call her on the phone and just start talking. The same would happen when he would go to visit, or he would bring my grandmother over to the house for some sort of occasion. I never really thought too much about it because in my family it was just considered normal and something that my father does. Based on talks with my mother, I was aware that my father had somewhat of a hard life growing up. My grandmother Flora moved my father and his young sister Linda to Baltimore when both were very young. I know my father and Linda basically grew up without their father present, but my mother and I really knew what happened, or when it happened. Just as the three of them moved to Baltimore, and my grandma Flora rented a third-floor apartment in the 19th century row home in the southeast part of the city. At 6 years old, Linda became very ill, and despite the efforts of her doctors, she eventually succumbed to her illness and passed away, leaving my father, age 10, and his single mother alone and struggling to move forward and on with life. Not knowing exactly what transpired over the next few years, I do know that the owner of the house, who occupied the main living floor, decided to put the entire 3-story home up for sale. My grandmother purchased the home, and that's where she resides alone until the day she passed on to the other side. During his younger years, my father did attend school and always worked as well and did normal teenage boy things. fast cars, motorcycles, and according to my mom, was a hit with the ladies, even though he was very quiet and kept to himself. My father eventually had to drop out of school his senior year and work full-time to help my grandmother along with the bills and I guess what you could say the cost of living. Things seemed rough and tired of struggling. My father thought the best thing he could do to further help his mother was to enlist in the military. So my father joined the Army in an attempt to better their lives. He served his time and eventually returned home to his mother and the very large home in which they occupied. He now found himself working in a strip mall at a name brand company that sold and repaired sewing machines. My mother just happened to work in the same strip mall at the candy counter of a department store. My mother told me that she would always try to strike up a conversation with my father every week when he would enter the store and buy candy for his boss. But he would just quietly look at her while she rang up his orders and handed it to him. He would then thank her, take his candy, and walk away. She told me when my father was young that one of the things she noticed first about him was how nicely dressed he always was and how much of a crush she had on this sharply dressed, handsome stranger who always was alone and never spoke to anyone except to thank her for candy. She used to always tease my father in front of me and say, "For the longest time I didn't know if you knew how to talk." At last, the day arrived where a conversation arose, and I guess you could say the rest is history. 53 years of history, to be exact. My mother sat alone at the dining room table, trying to find a rational explanation or any explanation for that matter to wrap her head around to make sense of the night's events. Being a person of faith and a believer of evil and its many faces, my mother knew she was in for a long, sleepless night, not to mention a lot of explaining tomorrow. Not only to me, but to all the neighbors who were witness to something strange but still unaware of exactly what they truly did witness. My mother said she went to bed around 2 o'clock in the morning and just laid there wide awake, staring at the window, overwhelmed with a feeling of dread, or as if something wasn't right. Could it be tonight's strange events? Could it be her imagination? Or could it be her talks with me concerning the afterlife and the whole other world that we have yet fully discovered but only seen on television and movies? The last time that my mother looked at the clock, it read 3:45, and she lay there next to my father, who had gone to sleep without saying a word. My mother said, without warning, the room appeared to have gotten dark, at which time she sat up in the bed, fearing someone had entered the bedroom, causing the light coming in from the window to have been blocked out. Just as he stared towards the window, a large dark mass entered the room from outside of the window and hovered feet from their bed up toward the ceiling. My mother began screaming and pushed on my father to wake up from his sleep. Being startled by my mother's yelling, my father immediately sat up in bed and, without my mother having to say a word, saw the ominous dark cloud of the unknown hovering near the ceiling just inside the window of their bedroom. Sitting there in sheer terror, not knowing what to do or if they should even try to move, the dark mass began to slowly move toward their bed. It circled their bed very slowly 3 times, at which time my mother swears she could hear a woman's evil laugh off in the distance. But from inside the dark figure, which had to be my parents flat on their backs, with my mother latched onto my father's arm as she would fall if she let go. The dark mass exited through the window, and immediately, according to my mother, the room returned to its natural light and dead silent that this peaceful part of the morning has to offer. Both my parents didn't really speak, but continued to lay there as if they were in some sort of virtual reality or surreal existence. To say the least, almost 2 hours had passed, and once the sunrise became apparent, both my parents dozed off into deep sleep, despite the fact that it was only for 3 hours. Once they were up, their day was started. My mother received a phone call from one of their neighbors, inviting her and my father over for breakfast and an explanation of what exactly everyone bared witness to the night before. Finishing her coffee and getting dressed for the day, my mother made her way over to the house where all the neighbors agreed to gather for breakfast. Even though my father declined the offer and decided to visit the library for a week's supply of audiobooks. By the time my mother entered her friend's house, everyone from the prior night was there, with the exception of Linda and, of course, my father, which came as no surprise. He decided to remain alone. Walking into the neighbor's house, my mother saw that everyone was fixing their plates and settling in at the dining room table, a similar resemblance to the night before. The very first thing that came out of my mother's mouth was, "I don't know who the hell or what the hell that woman is, but I don't want her here." One of the neighbors assured my mother that it isn't going to be an issue because after several attempts by phone and several minutes of contemplation on whether or not to invite Linda over for breakfast, a few of my parents' friends decided to walk over to her house and invite her out of common courtesy. And due to the fact that all throughout the morning, Linda wasn't answering her phone. Once they arrived at the front door, they knocked for several minutes without any sort of response. It wasn't until one of the neighbors discovered that they could see inside the house through the dining room window where the merry band of neighbors had gathered for a friendly seance just about 10 hours ago. What was revealed at this point was not only unnerving, but downright strange, not to mention leaving everyone feeling somewhat fearful, if not trapped inside a circle with an open portal into the unknown. Linda's house was completely empty. Empty meaning all the furniture, all the photos, the very dining room table where everyone sat in excitement, gone, as if Linda had not spent a moment in that house or even existed in their lives, even though it was for only a few short weeks. She completely disappeared in the middle of the night with no warning, no goodbye, and most importantly, no explanation. Hearing all of this made my mother even more frightened, if not terrified and somewhat angry. My mother felt so confused and scared of what may have happened or what may yet to happen. She explained to her friends that she had never seen my father act the way he has been acting since the seance took place and the transformation of Linda, if in fact that is even her real name. My mother's closest friend in the group, Donna, asked what was it about Linda and what occurred that caused my father to up and leave without saying a word, followed by his behavior at the table once Linda began speaking in what appeared to everyone as a man's voice. My mother said, "You know Buddy and how he is. I can't even get him to open up to me or talk to me about anything, let alone any of our friends." All the neighbors were in agreement that they could not figure out what had happened or what could have bothered my father to the point of the behavioral change and the lifeless stare that he presented just before leaving without warning, especially since all Linda gargled was, "This is Parris." Holding back my tears and slightly choking on her words, my mother took a breath and told all her curious and mystified neighbors, Parris was Buddy's father. Linda has yet to be seen again. The dark mass has never returned, and my father has never spoken a word of this incident, not even to my mother. Sorry. And that brings us to the end of tonight's reading of Chapter 4. My journey begins in Chapter 5. It's Parris from Paranormal, My Chosen Journey by Ernie Atwell. Boy, I'm a mess today. Technology doesn't like me. Uh, I hope you enjoy spending part of your evening with me as we continue exploring Ernie's incredible journey into the paranormal. His experiences remind us that sometimes a single moment, a single encounter, can change the course of a person's life forever. If you've been enjoying this series, please consider supporting Ernie by picking up a copy of Paranormal My Chosen Journey on Amazon. Reading the book in its entirety is the best way to experience all of the stories, insights, and lessons that have shaped his path. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, also, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another episode of Horror History and Hauntings Library Podcast or the Horror History and Hauntings Podcast. And please join me tonight at 8, where I will be interviewing Dr. Latriana Terry Brown. We're going to be discussing parapsychology, consciousness, and the paranormal. So join us here again at 8, and it will be an interview with Latriana. And I would also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had an experience that changed the way you look at the paranormal? Or was there a moment in your life that started your own journey into the unknown? Next week, also, we'll be sitting down with the author himself, Ernie Atwell, and hopefully learning more about his remarkable story. Until then, thank you for spending your evening with me. Sleep well and keep an open mind. And as always, good night and sweet dreams, guys. Bye bye. Oops, see, technology doesn't like me. There we go.